It is pretty crazy that we're on episode 126 featuring Dr. Jordan Shallow. Incredible episode. You weren't able to join me in person, but we actually were at Pure Muscle in RX Radio studio.
Yeah, why don't you talk about the studio?
Sick, man. Phenomenal setup that they have. 3 just incredible cameras that are probably worth more than our monthly rent is here at this place. But, you know, that's the perks of having Pre-Script and doing what they've been doing over there for years now. Incredible group of individuals. But first, let's talk about a little sports news. What's going on in the space? Dustin Johnson defying the PGA and joining the LIV Saudi-backed golf event with a $25 million purse. Jordan Maslin.
Seriously, eh?
If you are Dustin Johnson and you're that good of a golfer and you have the opportunity to make $25 million, are you doing it?
It's 100% happening. Yeah.
Really? You don't care it's Saudi backed? Like,
how should I approach this? You know, someone's gonna win it. So
joining Phil Mickelson is Jordan Maslin on the tee at number 1. Hey, just interesting because, you know, 4 months ago he said he would never, and I'm sure there's probably going to be other players. I think there's 42 players currently signed up.
I mean, at the same time, how much money does the guy have right now? 25 million is a lot, but
dude, at what point is it diminishing returns on that cash? Because he's also married to the Great One's daughter. Yeah. Dude, why you just keep people happy.
Agreed.
Just keep doing what you're doing, hanging out. You know, you got Paulina around your arm. Like, life's good, man. Don't be controversial. Anyway, Rose Zhang, the number 1 amateur golfer in the world, actually, and was the first ever college athlete to sign with Adidas, signing her NIL rights over. And
that's awesome.
It's going to be huge. First Adidas athlete, golfer. Interesting.
Really, eh?
Yeah.
That's a first one.
For NCAA specifically,
wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's true, because that would have just started within the year. Yep.
So, but it's their first initial big investment, and obviously, like, Adidas sees bright things coming from Rose. We see bright things.
Hey, they got good
performance.
Yeah.
They
awesome.
do. Canada's Jerome Blake also earned his first 200-meter win of the season at the Ostrava Golden Spike. Huge W. TO Pro Super Show this weekend. Bodybuilding event. Our boy Tyler Johnson's competing.
Yep. I saw his stories and his post in Ascension Fitness. His last leg workouts. He's looking pretty big, man.
Yeah. Like, to say the least.
To say the least, yeah.
Just another level that those individuals bring it to. It'll be interesting. That'll be my first bodybuilding show this weekend. Go to watch, see what it's like. Oilers lose game 1 to Colorado in the West. Who do you have winning that series?
Honestly, before this game, it was always still going to be Colorado. I thought they were probably going to win the Cup last year. I was wrong about that, but I think that they will take it this year. I think that they're going to get in the Cup.
I agree with you that Colorado is going to make the Cup final. I don't know whether I necessarily agree with a lot of your hockey decisions, so I'm going to revert back.
I bet a lot with my heart. That's a problem.
Probably lost a lot of money with that one also.
Did you know that they got, I think 20, it was 8-6, so 25 points, or 25 players to get points. That was the second most ever in playoff history. 25 players getting points in yesterday's game.
Oh, in the Colorado-Edmonton game.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was just trying to piece together what you meant there. 25 players. That's crazy.
I know.
That's insane. Final score 8-6?
Yeah, that's an exciting first game.
That's phenomenal. Well, I feel like with Edmonton, you're bound to have those at the first game. You've got McDavid flying around there.
But did you see that another controversial call here? Did you see the offside?
Yeah, and you referred to it as an offside despite the fact that the NHL called it onside. Honestly, right as you're watching this, drop a comment below whether that was onside or offside. That'd be great content for us to be able to bring back to the NHL and say, hey, what are you doing?
Hey, these athletes podcast listeners are the real referees.
Should be.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know what they reviewed in Toronto. Something about possession. I don't know. Whack story.
Yeah, like I mean, I'm sitting here feeling like the reffing this year is a little dicey, but it's probably like they have to make a lot of tough calls. I get it. It's probably controversial every year. You just slowly forget about it. Jordan
just taking the PC route. U.S. Open this weekend. Keeping an eye on Canadian Brooke Henderson. Still working on getting her on the pod. Pretty phenomenal opportunity for her to continue to showcase what Canadian golfers are doing. NBA Finals tonight. Boston.
I'm with my boy Dave Portnoy. Whatever he bets on, I bet on. I'll go for the Celtics.
Okay, fine. That's fine. I will take Golden State. I think the odds were something crazy like 83-17 in favor of Boston, which is just ridiculous. And I'll take you 2-1 on my odds.
Yeah.
Bet Golden State.
And I'm pretty sure even Stephen A. Smith said, I think he said the Golden State Warriors are probably going to take the next 2 out of 3 championships over the next few years. So he's pretty confident on them too.
He's bullish on it, eh?
Oh, yeah.
Who do you have in the New York Rangers versus Tampa Bay Lightning Eastern Conference Finals?
I'm going to bet Tampa Bay on that. You know, I think I mentioned this before. The team that knocks out the Leafs, I hope they win the cup for that reason.
Just so you can get yourself to sleep.
It just, you know what? Last year, the team made it to the cup finals. This year, I mean, likely that they probably will, but not taking anything away.
I'm taking the Rangers,
yeah?
100%. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you and your boy Shesterkin?
Man, this is the first time that Tampa's actually going to be playing against a proper goaltender.
I agree. In this suit, yeah, for sure.
And you know what? That's why Colorado's going to get through, unless Kemper's out for Colorado long term.
True. Yeah.
So that could be a deciding factor as well. But either way, what was incredible and what we know for a fact is this upcoming episode with Dr. Jordan Shallow. Again, had the honor of traveling down to Burling, Ontario to chat with him. Well, he was back from Dubai for a couple of weeks, running a couple pre-script sessions. What were your thoughts on the episode? Because you get the little fun sneak peek production of it prior to it going live.
Number one, obviously he's got his PhD, very intelligent and very well spoken. It's always cool to pick out like little different things that each person on this podcast says. And like in his case, he was a very humble guy. I liked, how he was talking about how, of course, he is a very hard worker, but he attributes a lot of where he is today to luck. And when you asked him, what would you say to yourself when you're 15 years old? He did not like the question. Like, nothing, man. Like, it got me where I am today, which is something that it's always cool to give those tips and those feedbacks to your younger self or that younger generation. But even having that point of view or his point of view on it was really awesome to hear.
Yeah, and I think it was probably in part just the way I asked it, but also there's different ways to approach grooming an athlete.
Oh, for sure.
And I think there's different reasons for each person, and he was probably in a state right now that was like, at 15, he probably knew what he needed to know. And honestly, there's not always a lot of people that are in that space.
Yeah.
Hence why we continue to put out this kind of content where we're educating, entertaining, and inspiring that next generation of athletes. And I'm amped that we've been able to do 126 of these, and who knows? I know we won't be here. That's all I know. But it's going to be a crazy
probably
ride.
Have the nice production set that you saw there.
Yeah, we're working on it. That's for sure. And I'm sure that you'd have more fun tinkering around with that stuff.
Probably.
Yeah, better than our iPhones. Anyway.
Still looks good.
This is episode 126 of the Athletes Podcast featuring Dr. Jordan Shallow. Here we go.
Background and knowledge.
No, because I'm a chiropractor. No one respects us anyway. So what the hell does it matter? If anything, it's an uphill battle. Everyone's like, this guy's. I was like, okay, cool, man. I can be a fucking janitor. Like, I don't care. Mm-hmm. So it works a lot to like. I don't want to say disadvantage, but it's definitely like a pain point that people. I mean, not a pain point. I obviously don't care.
Yeah.
But it's something that definitely doesn't work to my favor in the masses.
It's a interesting dynamic, though, because it kind of makes you a Swiss Army knife when it comes to working with guys individually, hands-on, in a team function. You can manage their nutrition, their training, their body health, their mobility. Like, I think that aspect makes a significant advantage for you compared to having 4 separate people training on one guy. Maybe they're not communicating well. It's going to lead to maybe not as good a performance on the field.
Yeah, I think the Swiss Army knife is just being one of the tools and knowing how all the other ones work. Like, I still think I'm very much now probably more of a super specialist than I've ever been.
Okay.
But because I know all the other languages, I've established like a really good network within that where I can go deep enough into their world to really hand off and make a smooth transition to someone in another discipline. And I think that's the advantage where it's not like, a lot of times walls of communication get put up because there's just a lack of understanding of the sub-disciplines that an athlete will work with. But because, whether it's speed development, whether it's strength and conditioning, whether it's rehabilitation, whether it's surgery, whether it's player coaches, skill coaches, I can go deeper into those worlds than probably most can. I don't go into those worlds because I understand that there are coaches who know a little bit about my world, but you know, I think the specialization aspect is useful, but having a broad net to cast is also useful. But you know, definitely a proponent of staying in your lane, and I probably do that more now than ever because I've established a network of people that if I need someone to manage nutrition here, and I can talk about training with them, and I know they know enough about what I'm doing,
right?
But they're still the go-to. So I can, and there are places where people prefer that.
Yeah.
But I prefer to kind of still use like a high performance model.
Okay.
But I'm lucky enough to have a network where I can kind of keep it in the family sort of thing, and everyone knows how to communicate.
So I'd love for you to dive into how you built that network. Explain who Jordan Shallow is, not Shallows. I'm not going to call you.
Appreciate that. Yeah, good looking out. Yeah, dude. Working for free is probably the shortest answer.
Okay, Gary V.
I don't pay any attention to him. So.
I know, but that's an interesting.
All right, then he stumbled across something good. Okay. Should I like do a high pitched voice and like yell at the internet about motivational stuff? I've only ever heard Gary V in Ubers. It's like Uber driver motivation. That's what I call Gary V. Anyways, yeah, it's tough. I mean, on the sports side of things, what would be really the first thing that kicked it off? Probably like 8-9 years ago, I was in chiropractic college in California. I did some volunteering at Palo Alto High School, just with a buddy of mine who was a strength coach, and he like brought me in. And then at the same time, I met someone from Sorinex who was outfitting the San Jose State University weight room, and he brought me in, and I met Gary Uribe, who was the strength coach at the time. And Gary was not really satisfied with the team doctors, because in that model, a team chiropractor would pay the team to be the chiropractor, and they use it as a marketing tool in their clinic for their outside patients and all that.
Okay.
So he's like, look, man, like we got Combine coming up. At that point, I didn't know really what Combine was, at least in the NFL. Mm-hmm. And they had a handful of guys that were good. One or two would actually go to Indianapolis. The other would do like their pro day at San Jose State. And he like talked to me. I would go in and train, and we established a relationship there. And he's like, you know, we got this linebacker, and we got this quarterback, and we got this running back, and can you like work with them? They all have injuries. I was like, yeah, sure, man. And I was second year chiropractic college.
Okay.
But like, you know, I'd been around weightlifting since I was 15 years old. So I was like, yeah, sure. So I would come in twice a week and do that. And then I met another guy. Dude, like literally, it's just, I met a guy at a squat rack is pretty much the answer to all these questions. So that was like, I would say that was a big one, starting off with San Jose State, because those kids ended up going into the league, and then when their off season would come around, they wouldn't know what to do, so they would message me. And yeah, it's there's almost too many to count. Like if you pull on the thread, it just keeps going back. It's usually building relationships with people that like lifting weights. That's really where it comes down to. Like my Trojan horse is I just come in and I don't want to talk about lifting weights. I just want to go train. Like met Gary and was like, hey, this is a really cool gym. My gym's not cool. Can I come in and just work out? He's like, yeah, sure. And then that planted the seed, and then I was there all the time, and then we got to talking, and from those conversations, like, oh, okay, like there's an aptitude here that could be useful. Mm-hmm. But that's, and you know, from there to Michael Tucker, who's now the strength and conditioning coach at Villanova, Mike Nicolini, who's now, I think he might be the head, but he was the assistant strength coach of the San Francisco 49ers now. Yeah. So they all went off, and then, you know, next thing you know, I'm in the Niners weight room, and I'm, you know, talking to Mike all the time, and the network effect is like literally every single person who, oh yeah, and like one of my really good friends from Stanford is Corey Schlesinger, who's the strength coach for the Phoenix Suns, and it's too much. Like I would literally have to sit with a whiteboard and write it all out. But it starts with, I think it's like the takeaway is it just starts with actually be passionate about lifting weights. Don't be passionate about being a strength coach. Like that comes as a side effect.
Okay.
You'll be passionate about being a strength coach if you're passionate about lifting weights.
Right.
So I think people get focused on like the problem and not the solution.
Okay.
So and then just build relationships, and that's it. If you can do those two things well, you'll be fine.
And provide a good service.
Yeah, it comes down to the passion side, because you'll know when you don't, and it's so objective now, especially with all the data you can collect. It's like you can start to quantify. Look, I can't catch a fucking ball.
Yeah.
Right. So there's only so much I can do in the gym.
Yeah.
So if you can do those things, you should be well on your way.
Okay, so was it at 15 years old, once you picked up that first dumbbell, you're like, fuck, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life?
Yeah, I was first dumbbell and read my first Poliquin article.
Okay.
Yeah.
Explain to the Athletes Podcast listeners what a Poliquin article would
Why
be.
Poliquin? Charles Poliquin was probably the most prolific strength. Like, the fitness industry is what it is, for better or for worse, because of Charles Poliquin.
Okay.
He's a French-Canadian strength coach who unfortunately passed 3 years ago now, if I'm not mistaken.
Shout out to Canada.
Yeah, seriously. No, he was the GOAT. He had more Olympic medals than any strength coach in history. I think he had 230, 250 athletes medal from an innumerable amount of countries, contracted by, just about every team that's won a championship. Chicago brought him in the year before they won the cup. And it's like, again, he's not putting the puck in the net, but where he goes, accolades and titles and championships seem to follow. So I read an article by him and I was like, oh, I didn't know that you could think this much about lifting weights. I thought you just went in after, Lundy was there. Lundy was the first guy I worked out with. And that was somewhere between grade 9 and grade 10 or something like that. And so I didn't know you could think about it.
Okay.
We sure as shit weren't thinking about it. But then I read this article. It's like, oh, okay, like that kind of makes sense. It was a bit of an olive branch. And then I just kept climbing and was like, here I am. 17 years later? And yeah, so when I started, first dumbbell and first article, first book, and it was always kind of that back and forth. Like I never went too far into one without the other.
Okay. So what would you go back tell that 15-year-old self now?
Nothing. That's such a dumb question. If I'm in a position where someone might listen to this, hi mom.
Yeah. My mom's listening.
I wouldn't. Okay, I'm a start.
Yeah.
I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't tell him anything. He didn't need to hear anything. I'm here. I'm stoked with this whole situation.
You've got a lot going on.
Crazy. I'm waiting for someone to come put me in jail.
Yeah.
Like, sir, you can't do this. You're not qualified to do whatever this is. No, I don't like the question.
Okay. Because as a small town Windsor kid, you just imagined this. You didn't think it would become a reality. Like, I'm curious.
You just get so lucky.
Okay.
So much of what people do is luck. Like an inordinate amount is luck. It's a frustrating amount is luck.
Yeah.
So people like espouse advice. It's just like, dude, you were just like, and luck and opportunity and preparedness or whatever, like the fucking Instagram thing says. Sure, fine, but I wouldn't want to impart any wisdom on someone because I just got so lucky.
Okay.
First off, I speak English. What an upper hand. Right? In the fitness industry, like if I'm Lithuanian, this doesn't go anywhere. Mm-hmm. So I was born in Canada. Amazing. I'm in Canada speaking English.
Yeah.
All right. I'm already halfway there. Mm-hmm. So it's just like, I would be so remiss to just be like, well, I tell myself and all you out there to just keep, I know, dude, just, I don't know. If you like something, just keep doing it.
Okay. Let's maybe change the question.
Okay.
There's probably certain things that you wish you had known back then for the past 17 years.
No.
Nothing
No.
about weight training.
No.
A 4-2-2 rhythm when you're working out.
No. Because
Nothing.
you know what you realize?
What's that?
17 years in, it doesn't matter. That's the best part. It doesn't matter. That 4-2-2, it doesn't matter.
So it's just about going through the process,
It was-
learning,
look,
getting
like
lucky.
it's So some athletes, it's because it's you don't play a zone. You play man to man, right? So like there's some athletes that are so type A that they won't. Just like we were talking off air about like my time at Apple. Like if you have someone who's very analytical, like I sat down with the gold medal badminton player from the last Olympics from where's Victor from? Denmark, and within 5 minutes he had rattled off like 10 different podcasts he's listened to. He's talking about his biometrics. It's like, okay, this guy needs tempo in his program, right? Like this guy is so analytical. He's so calculated. He's very type A. Like he's the best in the world. Everyone's trying to beat him. So he wants to know that all his bases are covered. He leaves nothing to subjective interpretation. Nothing. He's data driven to not necessarily a fault, but it's like, oh, okay, like 4-2-2, whatever the hell tempo, great. But if you have a kid who's just got drafted to the league and is going to sign $1 million bonus plus endorsement deal, whatever, and was making nothing for like less than nothing, like came dirt poor, and you're going to try and pin this guy down for a tempo, it's like if the tempo of the exercise makes that much of a difference, pick a different exercise where it doesn't make a difference.
Okay.
Because he's just listening to DaBaby and just picking cars on his phone. Like that's what it is. So what matters isn't the tempo, it's knowing when to actually use it.
Okay. So when should people using it? Like if going through this, I'm trying to establish, educate, entertain, and inspire that next generation of athletes, right? So for someone like you, 17 years experience in the industry, we've got a ton of football, basketball players wanting to get better at their sport.
Right.
What specifically should they be seeking out throughout that high school process to ensure that they're getting to that next level?
Stronger.
Get stronger?
Get period.
Just lift weights?
Nothing will return more on your investment than getting stronger. And I think right now, and like, now that I understand the framing of your question, like the biggest like detriment to your programming at a younger age is going to be pursuing skills too heavily and not just pursuing getting stronger. That is, you have such a window at that age, like 17, 18, 19, to get ridiculously strong.
Yeah.
Like, you capitalize on that. Don't waste time. And I always say, like, you know, obviously still play your sport, but that should be the priority of your skill training, right? Because everything when you're younger, whether you think it's agility, whether you think it's max velocity, whether you think it's, you know, change of direction, whether you think it's vertical jump, all of those things when you're that age are a manifestation of your strength, period. Your conditioning is a manifestation of your strength at that age, right? And then as you get older and into the league, then we can start to subdivide these adaptations into their own training modalities. But as a young kid looking to maximize their training to be better at their sport, just get stronger. Like, that is the easiest or the best advice you can do. If you're a bit heavier, getting stronger and lighter would also be not a bad idea, almost regardless of sport. And linemen might be a little bit different, linebackers might be a little bit different, but that's the number one thing you can work with. And a lot of people go on Instagram and they see a lot of these like sport specific drills. Like, if someone punches another landmine, I'm going to lose my mind. And so if you're in a combat sport, you're teaching yourself how to punch slower.
Yeah.
Right. So, and also to like be wary of anything in the gym that looks too much like something you do on the court. Like, a lot of strength coaches will use this very like circular logic and just be like, well, you see, because you golf, we're going to attach the end of a Titleist to a cable stack and we're going to swing. It's like, no, please don't do that. Right. So I always reference this idea. It's an idea born of a roboticist in the late 70s. I forget his name, called the Uncanny Valley. Are you familiar with this?
No.
Okay. I swear this has to do with strength and conditioning, so bear with me.
I love it.
So the Uncanny Valley talks about like a human's likeness of robotics, essentially, robots. Okay. And like he uses examples purely of robotics, but I'll use like cartoons as an example. The more something, for the most part, the more something looks like a human being, the more like anthropomorphized its characters are, or its characteristics are, the more we tend to like it. Yeah. The less, okay, whatever. But there's a valley, right? And the Uncanny Valley is like this drop off. So let's say, for example, have you ever seen the movie WALL-E?
Yes.
Right. So WALL-E's just like a microwave on tracks, right? It doesn't have many features of a human being. It doesn't have ears or a mouth. Or legs or anything, but it's, I don't know, it seems to have emotion or whatever, somehow, however Pixar depicts it. So you're like, okay, that's kind of like down here on this graph, right? So then you think of like Minions, right? You're like, okay, like they're more human than
It's getting there.
They have overalls, but like one of them's got one eye and they're yellow and they're this big. So they're like, all right, yeah, better. I like that. Like, and look at the theater, right? What do we like more? What sold more, Minions or Minions, right? Yeah. So then you keep going, and it's like, all right, maybe like The Simpsons. Okay. Like, they're still yellow, which, you know, not. But Marge has like 4 foot tall blue hair. It's like, okay, that doesn't exist in real life, but they have features looking like, you know, I don't think they have 5 fingers. Maybe they may have 4.
I didn't watch The Simpsons.
Really? Yeah, you're missing out. But then like Family Guy. Family Guy's real. It's like Peter is white, then Cleveland is black, and you're like, oh, okay, this is real. I think they all have 5 fingers. This is more real than Family Guy, more real than Minions, more, I swear this has something to do with training.
It's going up the graph.
So, right. Yeah. But then we hit a point where it's like, have you ever seen Polar Express? Yeah. Where it's like, it's Tom Hanks, but it's not. Or A Christmas Tale.
Okay.
or A Christmas Story with Jim Carrey, but it's animated,
Yeah.
and he plays Scrooge.
Mm-hmm.
It's fucking weird. And so it falls off. So we don't like that.
Okay.
Right? So it's like, oh, we're getting closer, we're getting closer, we're getting closer. It's like, okay, this looks like a human, but it's definitely not a human. Whew. Our likeness for that animation drops off. But then it spikes again when we see a real person.
Mm.
So think of this when it comes to training.
Okay.
Okay, so like in the gym, like hip extension is hip extension, right? So if you need to extend your hip to run, then yeah, hip extension is definitely close to running. And maybe running is a poor example.
I'm just imagining a minion doing a squat right now. And
Right. So like the idea is that polar express, the things that are so like it but not, drive a negative adaptation to the objective outcome. Right. So the Titleist attached to the cable stack, when we swing that in the gym, and I don't know, Lundy, how heavy is a Titleist? 400 grams or something like that?
I just want to clarify, you're talking about a Titleist. That's just a brand of a club. So
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't matter.
It's free marketing for him. It's good.
Okay,
But-
yeah, sure. Whatever. I bought my dad a pair of clubs last Christmas. So when they're swinging a golf club that's 400 grams, and then all of a sudden it's 30 pounds on a Life Fitness cable stack, they're going to change their patterning.
Right.
Your lats are going to have to be way more involved. Your delts are going to have to be way more involved. Your QL is going to be way more involved, right? Your hips probably not going to be as involved, right? Because you have weight pulling you literally off the ground, which you're not going to have,
Yeah.
right? So that's like this uncanny valley that a lot of people can get sold on very easily because like, oh yeah, like man, my son golfs. This makes a lot of sense. It's like no, just win in the weight room. Get better at squatting. Get better at deadlifting. Throw things, push things, carry things, pull things, lift things, hinge things, squat things. Sweet, because that's the peak of that. And then on the other side of that valley, you have your sport, right? But strength and conditioning right now is just dive bombing into this chasm where athletes are getting slower and fatter and weaker because they're like wrapping a bunch of bands around them and like having them like torque their hips around. It's like, they do that when they pitch.
Right.
They already do that. They're doing that so much already. They don't need to do that anymore, right? What they probably need is stronger hip extension, right? What they probably need is a better rate of force production, right? What they probably need is to be lighter. All of these things can win at that first peak, but strength and conditioning is just spending time in this valley of like, oh, it looks sport-specific training.
Yeah.
It's like, no, what? No, stop. Sport-specific training is the other side of the valley. It's the sport itself. So that's like my rant and my big advice. If you're a kid, like there's nothing new under the sun. When you're in the gym, don't get cute. Like play your sport when you're playing your sport. Get strong when you're in the gym. And then allow those strength properties to improve tendon stiffness. Allow it to prove max velocity. Allow it to prove vertical jump, horizontal jump, all of those things. So if you're a kid, especially if you're a kid, that's your main focus.
Okay. Get stronger. So if you were, from a coach's perspective, what's the best qualities that you look for in an athlete to try and train, get better, overall improve? Are there specific aspects that you're like, man, this guy listens really well. I don't have to cue him that much. I'm going to get results. Are there specific athletes from sports that you've seen do better than others?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously like the outcome is in the gym.
Yeah.
Right. Or sorry, the outcome is on the field. So there's great athletes in the gym that don't do shit on the field. I think a property in the gym that might have a predictive quality to on the field where you can see a guy in the gym like, oh, okay, like this guy's a good player. Variability, the ability to just access any different position.
Okay.
So like I try to not put athletes in too many positions where I have to overcue them.
Right.
Right. Because it's just like, I just change the exercise. I'll change it to a more remedial version of the exercise where they're able to actually drive the stimulus without overthinking it. And that comes with a bit of an asterisk. But for the most part, when it comes to like what is a predictive quality of a good athlete, symmetry is number one. And they've proven that in research, like sprinters, when it comes to like if you sliced Usain Bolt straight down the center, other than like his vital organs, like having a spleen on the left side and an appendix on the right side and a liver on the right side and a heart that's a little left to center, dead symmetrical, right? So that, and again, what are we going to do about that? That's
Preloaded
sort of,
gun with your genetics, right?
exactly, yeah. But the pulling the trigger, I think, is, again, whether it's genetic or not, is the just variability of movement, to be able to work through and have awareness through all three planes. Primarily, good athletes, I guess the hardest one for them to access, the hardest one for everyone to access and control, is the transverse plane. So like people who can control movements in a rotational plane tend to do very well in sports. Right?
Gotcha.
Sports, and again, and when I think sports, I think mostly football.
Yeah.
There are positions where that's not necessarily the case. Like if you're a sumo wrestler, rotation might not be the biggest deal. Sagittal plane movement, flexion extension might be it. But when we think athletes, baseball, hockey, basketball, football, usually having a heavy emphasis through like the transverse plane, like an ability to rotate well, control movement, coordinate movement, that's it. So like I would say that is probably going to be your biggest predictive value when it comes to going like, okay, this person's going to be a good athlete.
I've also heard you talk about rhythm and how important that is with athleticism. You want to touch on that?
Yeah, so rhythm it's a function controlled by a part of our brain called our cerebellum. So our cerebellum is like this walnut-shaped region of our brain behind our brainstem. And the cerebellum is like, I would just call your cerebellum like your movement brain. So it's responsible for vision, coordination, tone, rhythm, anything that would be like an athlete would have to display.
Right.
So rhythm is essentially like timing and coordination. So from an athletic perspective, most good athletes, especially football players, are really good dancers.
Yeah. And
they like to dance a lot in between sets. And I just stand there like a not good athlete with two left feet and go, okay, we're going to do your set when you're done. So rhythm is just usually, so I mean, I don't know how deep into the neuroscience we want to go.
Let's go deep, man. You're the like nerd bodybuilder, as you've been referred to.
Go get a pot of coffee. This might take a while. So the cerebellum breaks down into three components. We have the vestibulocerebellum, the cerebrocerebellum, and the spinocerebellum. So the best way to think about the cerebellum, let's go the motion capture route. Okay, so you're familiar with motion capture? Most people use it. Like mocap is used to analyze golf swings and pitches, and it's, if you're
video games,
FIFA or NBA 2K, whatever we're at now. So like, they put on this like CGI suit, and it's like this Lycra suit with a bunch of little like ping pong ball looking things all over. So rhythm is an expression of overall cerebellar function. Now, if we look at these three systems, the spino, the cerebro, and the vestibulo, so the spinocerebellum is probably the one that we might have the greatest amount of impact on. The spinocerebellum is representative of all of our peripheral inputs for like what we call the mechanoreceptors, inputs that sense skin stretch, vibration, deep pressure, light touch, heat to a certain degree. So all of these inputs let me know, just like if I had a motion capture suit on, these little transmitters are going to go back to central processing, in that case a computer, and tell the computer where my wrist is relative to my elbow, relative to my shoulder. So if I do this, a little guy on a screen is doing this as well. And then they can lay over a skin on top of it, like Lord of the Rings, the little Andy Serkis Smeagol character. So that's your spinocerebellar tract, right? So if you don't have a well-trained, whether it's proprioception, which is via muscle spindles, Golgi tendon organs, what's called Pacinian corpuscles, Merkel's disc, Meissner's corpuscles, all of these different mechanoreceptors, if you don't have adequate stimulation, if you don't get like a clear signal back to the brain, you're going to be missing part of your cerebellar function. Right. So like something like an injury, something like muscle tightness, name it. You roll an ankle, it's like, okay, that's going to be an issue, right? Because you're not getting a clear, high-resolution picture from that one vein of cerebellar function, right? So, like, if I'm trying to, rhythm, if I'm trying to time moving my arm with my other arm and my leg, but I'm not getting a fuzzy signal from that input from my one arm, so you're going to dance like Elaine from Seinfeld, right? So, but the other part of that is the other two subsystems. The cerebrocerebellum has to do with how the cerebellum impacts or interacts with your cerebrum, or your cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex is where we start to look at like motor patterns, that word motor patterns that everyone likes to just throw around, but no one really knows what it means. Like, oh, he's got good motor patterns. Like, what does that mean? So probably the easiest example of the cerebral cortex is like if I do a bicep curl, right? It's a very easy sequence of events for me, right? Like if we think about how this would work, it starts in like your pre and primary motor cortex. It goes out to through your ventral spinal nerves, so like the nerves that go out of your spinal cord to the front of your body, and then bicep would go through like your C5 nerve root out through your brachial plexus, and it would just cause this depolarization. Then you go through like all the muscle physiology of like sarcoplasmic reticulum and troponin C and all that, and then next thing, oh, look at that, yay. Pretty simple, right? Like imagine having like a zip folder, right? So like we're sending large files through a computer, from computer to computer. We're going to compress that file, we're going to send it, and then someone on the other end can unzip it, right? So that's what a motor pattern's like. So bicep one, that's at the front of the Rolodex. I do that 3-4 times a week. So that's right at the ready to compress, zip, send, uncompress, right? So, but when we think about something like a free throw, way more complex, right? Like your foot and ankle and hip and knee and pelvis and spine and shoulder and wrist, and so that's a much larger file, right? So you want to make sure that file is polished. None of those files within that zip folder are throwing any error messages, right? Because if you have an error message, you're going to miss. So if you give me a basketball and I'm like, oh shit, I got to go deep into the Rolodex, into the warehouse, into the file folder to like, shit, unzip. Where is this folder to, send, compress, and then unzip. So like my free throws are trash.
What are the odds you make that free throw, just for people, like 50-50?
50-50. I'm not like, so here's the thing. It's because I have other properties.
Okay.
So like that's a good point. Maybe we'll return back to that at the end, because the cerebellum allows for like redundancy backups, right? It's not just two things, it's three. So if one isn't producing properly, sending a good message to the brain, the other two can pick it up.
Okay.
So we'll see that. That's actually a really good segue. So the cerebral cortex, this is where like visualization comes into play.
Yeah.
So I think it was the University of Chicago did a study back in the 80s with free throws specifically, where they took 3 cohorts. They took one out on it was like a 2-month study maybe. And they just went and said, hey, go shoot basketballs for 2 hours. So one group goes out, shoots basketballs for 2 hours. The next group, hey, go on the court and visualize shooting basketballs for 3 hours. So they didn't actually shoot a single ball. And the third group just stayed home and did nothing. The shooting basketballs group improved 25%. The go out and visualize improved 23%, which is like not nothing. And I would argue if the window of time in which those basketball players had was longer to actually shoot the balls, they'd incur fatigue that caused them to miss more shots than they would make, and probably start to depreciate that objective outcome less to that than the visualization cohort.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
The cerebral cortex, or the cerebral or the cerebrum's contribution to cerebellar function is huge, because that's where we really polish our motor programs. Right. And I think with football, one thing they do inadvertently well is they watch a lot of film. Right. But when they're watching a lot of film, it's not, I don't think necessarily it's like, oh, so you see how you slanted on this route and it's like, okay. It's just allowing them to go through like the quote unquote mental reps. Right. So then, because when you play sports, you're not like in the middle of a route going, what did coach say? You're like, oh God, that guy's big. Like, you just don't have time to think. But if you've done the thinking already, it finds its way into that compressed folder. And then when you unzip that folder, you're in a better place. The last one is the vestibulocerebellar system. So the vestibulocerebellar system that feeds into it works with your vestibular apparatus in your inner ear, as well as your eyes, right? And this is where the biggest redundancy system, like the biggest backup system, comes into play. Because we're very visual creatures. And one of the forms of like mastery, it's all in like the language, we don't even realize it, is, he can do it with his eyes closed. Like, we love no-look everything. Yeah,
Jordan like hitting that free throw.
Yeah, if I like no-look drank out of my water bottle, people are like, that's fucking brilliant, right? Because it's the worst visual creatures, right? Like you ever thrown a tennis ball at a dog that's like doesn't really have it all, and it just...
Yeah, it looks awkward.
Yeah. And like, I know people like that. Igor Jajic, my buddy, we grew up from Windsor. He's not going to listen to this, but like, he couldn't catch the broadside of a barn. He couldn't catch a fucking cold in the winter. Like, he just. And part of that is, he doesn't know where his hands are. He doesn't have those inputs. But there's a visual. If you want to, and I've done this before, one of the best performance enhancing drugs you can take for an athlete,
Adderall.
laser. That's pretty good. laser vision correction.
Really?
Absolutely.
So half these athletes are just walking out there with less than 20/20 vision, and it would improve drastically.
We can go. What's Tiger walking around with? He got his.
No idea.
He got his corrected better than normal.
Oh.
You literally cannot imagine what that's like.
Yeah.
So he's walking around with fucking telescopes on his head.
Interesting.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But that's like, there's so many times where athletes have come to me, and I have a guy that I work with. I'm like, go see him. Go down to Texas. Go see him. Get your eyes fixed.
Wow.
Get your eyes, because it is when all else fails. That's our backup system. And this is everything from like entry level training adaptations to advanced. Like we can use vision and manipulating visual fields to help progress the acquisition of skill when it comes to moving. Like if I have a client that can't squat to depth and they're just some new person in the gym, just put them in front of a mirror. Because you know why? Because they don't know where their knees, hips, ankles, foot, pelvis, shoulders are in space. They have no idea.
Right.
And then when you start to pull that away, right, you start to like take away that visual feedback, you then start to rely heavier on the other cerebellar inputs, right? So this is where the proprioception, that spinocerebellar tract that we talked about at the beginning, becomes so important. Like some of the craziest plays in football are like the catches that are just like this.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I'm looking here, but how does he know where his hand is? Like, well, we have, Merkel's disc, Meissner's corpuscles, Pacinian corpuscles, Golgi tendon organ reflexes, muscle spindles that are giving this brain a very clear message. But it's going into a brain that's unzipping a folder that's done this 10,000 times, right? So where we might not be using that the ocular component of the vestibulocerebellar system, we have a very robust backup system that are like, no worries, I got it. Right? So I don't even remember what the original question was, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
But it's like, that's how athleticism kind of works,
Yeah.
right? So when we look at training, again, if you're in high school, eat food and just gain weight. Don't worry about any of this stuff. But there's a point where, like, I always talk about Saquon Barkley. He power cleaned 405 in high school.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, let's talk cerebellar subsystems, man. Like, let's talk about how we organize your training so you're not doing that every week. You don't need to get any stronger than that. His power to weight ratio is absolutely insane. DK Metcalf runs a 10-3 100 just on a whim at 240. It's like, okay, we're done getting stronger.
Right.
Right? You don't need. You're the strongest guy in the league. You produce more force than anyone else in the league. So how do we make you better? It's like, well, now we need to dissect these three systems to improve your coordination, improve your vision, improve your reflexes, improve your balance, improve your rhythm, improve your coordination, improve your posture.
Damn. Any other like tricks other than fixing your eyes to better than 20/20 that you'd like suggest for pro athletes to be getting in?
It's usually, honestly, it's weight.
Weight?
It's weight management. Jerry Rice said, if you want to have a long career, get lighter.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And obviously, like, there's positions where that's not the case, and those are usually positions with a very short shelf life.
Yeah.
But yeah, because a lot of times, as you get older, you might get weaker. Some people get older and they get stronger, but football specifically is a pretty brutal sport.
Yeah.
And the recovery it takes to train and the recovery it takes to just recover from a game or a practice or whatever, so you got to give way to one of those things, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's too much coming out of the stimulus bucket. So if you want to be stronger, it's all relative. Get lighter, right? So if you're a running back, if you're a wide receiver, if you're a quarterback, work on improving body composition, getting lighter. That's a longevity play.
Any other like monsters in the gym? I know you mentioned a couple of guys in the NFL there, but like any guys that I know you're doing a lot with the draft, pre-draft, combine stuff. Any guys that you're like, man, that guy's a dark horse and he's gonna come out, like people don't know about him yet.
There's just guys I like.
That's okay too.
Sky Moore.
Yeah.
Sky Moore. He's in Sky. DeCallum Brooks is in this. Where'd Sky go? Sky went to Saints? So I'm going to fuck this up. I don't remember where
We'll find out. Kyle's really good at it, I'm sure.
Where did Sky end up? Sorry, we had a lot of kids go in the draft this year.
Yeah, how many? Like, let's dive in, because this is part of where I'm really excited. Like, you've got so many different arms attached to what you're doing.
Yeah.
Not just the two massive ones attached to your body.
It's just one. I mean, it's doing one thing. It's the only thing I think about. So yeah, I work with, where'd you go, Lund? Chiefs? I went to KC. I was thinking of Jacoby Durant. Jacoby went to LA. So yeah, I got affiliated with House of Athlete
Yeah.
in Weston, Florida. I worked with a very prominent, well-known, I'm not going to say his name, athlete after he tore his ACL a few years ago. He actually, to narrow it down, he just won Super Bowl last year.
Yeah.
And
People can figure that out
you
pretty quickly.
Sort that out, yeah. So I worked with him post rehab. We actually had him up in Toronto, and then we kind of sent him on his way. I was in Florida just by happenstance visiting some friends, and he messaged me and was like, "Hey, you should go check out my buddy's gym." And it was Brandon Marshall, and walked in the first day and just kind of trained. Didn't really know how the gym worked, but they were nice enough and let me train. Based off of the fact that I was to find out later that they just thought I played football.
Okay.
And when I was going in to train, no one was
Questioned
allowed
it.
to drop in. And they're like, who does he play for? I'm like, we don't know. But
Just this 270-pound
Just-
Canadian man
just
just rolled in
leave
with a
him.
big beard. We
Yeah,
have to let
so-
him in.
And then I got to know one of the coaches who had worked side by side with me in the rehab of the player who told me to go there, was really good friends with one of the head strength coaches, Troy Jones, who's like one of my closest friends now. So we got to talking a bit, and then I started talking with Brandon. I ended up actually working with Brandon for the better part of 6 months, just one-on-one with him. And we got chatting on like the business side of things. HOA is a monster facility, and I have some experience in like a multidisciplinary setting. So started helping out on the clinical side.
You're being humble there too. Like some experience. Get the heck out of here.
So I met through that. I met another strength coach named Yo Murphy, who at the time was running Yo Murphy Performance out of Tampa, who's then assimilated under the umbrella of HOA. So I was there. So this is 2 years in a row now that I'll have done pre-combine assessments. So in January we have combine kids come in, and they have a kind of an 8-week window to train to prepare for the our combine in Indianapolis at the end of February. So I just kind of run assessments on them and give my recommendation to the coaching staff about how we should go about their training, because those guys, very rare do you find a clean bill of health coming out of a college program at the Division I level. So that's sort of when I talked about specialization earlier, that's really my like niche specialty, is like bridging the gap of corrective exercise and exercising correctly with high performers. So, the go-to physical therapy rehab stuff is not going to scale to someone who, is going to run on a good day a 4.3 or a 4.4 or, bench 41 reps at 225. So like, how is it that we can kind of Rosetta Stone and meet them where they're at with exercise intervention that'll make a significant difference in 8 weeks so that they can show up to Indy and kind of put on their best show. So that's I got started with that, and then we did an off-season prep that same year, so pre-training camp, pre-OTAs. So like mid-June, probably 6 weeks from early June to mid-July. I was there the entire time and got to like treat and train and work with and kind of take some guys who were having some issues or chronic issues and work with them one-on-one, which was a lot of fun. And was back in Tampa this last year with Yo, and it was in both. I went to Yo, Tampa and Weston, another pre-combine class, which was great. I think we probably had all told 35, 40 kids go in the league, which is amazing.
That's incredible.
We had a lot from first round. I think our top, Chris Olave, went 11th to the Saints in the first round. We had, I think Alec Pierce went in the first round. He was from Tampa Bay. And then all the way down to like unsigned free agent or undrafted free agent signings. So yeah, and then I'll head back in June to Tampa Bay and work with Yo for another preseason with some of the veterans. So a lot of that is, bless you, a lot of that is just being prepared, right? Like the history is 80% of a diagnosis, and you can find more information about these kids on the internet than they can give you. They just forget. Like, like, oh, hey, tell me about your knee surgery in second year of high school. Like, oh yeah. Yeah, no, I like totally like tore my ACL and MCL. I was like, oh, so it's like I get a roster of kids that I'm going to be working with, or pros that I'm going to be working with, and I just go through their whole careers and like Google search news, the Alabama Gazette, and in the 7th grade he sprained his, and I go all the way back to that, and then you get to meet him in person and go through some assessments, and then you help write the program for the next, whether it's combine or the season, and send them on their way.
Okay, so we have to touch on like your memory and knowledge recall after this question.
Okay.
Because I feel like you've got a pretty good ability to do that. But first, like fine-tuning a Ferrari versus a Honda Civic.
Right.
you're working with the Flagrant 2 podcast guys,
Yeah.
training them.
Yeah, it was fun.
You're also training the best athletes in the world.
Yeah.
Why do you enjoy doing both? Because I've heard you explain it, but I think it's practical and important for people to learn, like, your passion for it, which you touched on in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, they're very similar.
Okay.
They're very similar.
Interesting.
Like,
Andrew Schultz and Leonard Fournette are not the
it's funny
same.
because that was like most of my days was I'd go from Miami and Wynwood with Schultz up to Weston and work with Lenny. Yeah, there's I mean, obviously physical capacity, you know,
Slightly different.
Fournette's 245 in season, and he'll run a mid 4.5. Yeah, like
Just a beast.
He's terrifying.
Yeah,
he's so good. But yeah, like they both want to learn, they both want to work.
Okay.
Sweet, give me that. Yeah, it's and they're both really good at what they do. They both find different utilities in training. Like Schultz just wants, and we talked about this on his podcast, like he just wants to work. Like he just wants to not be able to breathe.
He wants to lay on the ground
That's
afterwards.
it. Yeah, that's all he wants to do. So that's what we do.
But as a trainer, that's got to be a little frustrating. Like, hey, you could be getting a significant amount, like more out of this.
But so that's the thing, and that's where, you know, I talked earlier about, like, it doesn't matter. You got to play the man.
Yeah.
He's
fair.
a stand-up comedian.
Yeah.
Right? He's selling out 2 nights at Radio City Music Hall in New York.
Yeah.
Right. Like he's selling out 7,000-8,000 seat stadiums. Like if that's what he needs to clear his head, like he's an animal. Like Schultz is an absolute animal. He legit, and I don't know if anyone knows this or if I'm to even say this, but like when he did his Netflix special, like he'd do 16-18 hour days. Like he does 2 podcasts. He does with Charlemagne the God, and he does Flagrant, and then he goes on tour and he manages a team of they're probably got 12 now.
Yeah.
And like travel logistics while still having a relationship and all that. Like he's a monster.
Mm-hmm.
Most people just see him as like the funny guy that just laughs at shit, but he's an absolute savage. Like he'll stay up till 4:30 in the morning practicing walking out on stage. Like perfection is the goal for both of those guys, and it's like, okay, if it means you're gonna feel better going on stage if you get an hour out of your own head where your biggest focus is like getting air into your body, great, then that's what we'll do.
Yeah.
But then it's the complete opposite. Like I gotta put the reins on someone in Leonard's position where it's like, hey man, let's constrain this exercise so you only are lifting 30 pounds. Right? Because he's got the engine, right? He's gonna like burn the tires out. I always think of like those athletes, like, have you ever seen Top Gear where they drive the Bugatti? The guy's going like 100,000 miles an hour, and he's like and he's like, you know, don't worry, like, he's got at this speed, I forget the statistic, but it's something to the effect of like, at this speed the tires will burn out in 7 minutes. He goes, don't worry, I'll be out of gas in 4. So it's like, how do I get him out of gas before the tires burn out? Like, that's when I think of those guys.
Yeah.
Because again, like,
I'm pulling them back.
We have to, because they if you pull them back, I think of it like those little cars when you're a kid. You pull them back, and then on the field they'll go forward, right? But if you don't pull them back and you just push them forward, they're not going to create any meaningful torque. They're not going to be able to recover. So many other systems are just going to be redlining. Like I was at Buck's training camp. That's where I got that. Yeah. I was at Buck's training camp this year, and we were like in the VIP section. We were monitoring them, and they did 7,000 yards in a practice. It's like a good season for a lot of these guys is 1,000 yards. Like if you get 1,000 yards rushing, you're like you're one of the best in the league. And they did 7,000 yards in a practice, right? Like running backs or wide receivers, and it's like, okay, what am I going to do to this guy in the gym?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do something.
Make sure you're eating a ton.
Yeah, eating a ton. Or just like, hey, we're not going to train at all, right? And having the confidence to understand how the field should dictate the weight room, not how the weight room should dictate the field. I think we're an adjunct, right? Because it's such a skill sport that we just want to make sure that they can express those skills. So like that kind of data is so useful because it's like, okay, the gas tank is almost empty, but the tires are almost blown.
Right.
So it's like, if there's anything left in the gas tank, we're going to try and preserve that so we don't use that gas to burn out the tires, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you've got this 270-pound physique, ton of tats, burning boats. I'd love for you to touch on that. how do you like? What is the wildest reaction you've gotten from someone once you then spit out, 3, 4 syllable words in succinct right afterwards, and then you're like, because you're kind of the bait and switch with your physique. I know you've talked about that as like you're like, hey, I look like this, but I can talk like this and explain things in detail, probably better than 99% of the population. How do you manage people's expectations?
I have no expectations of them.
Ooh.
That's probably the best. I don't like, and there's a point where that wasn't the case, but you want to work with me, you don't want to work with me. I don't really care.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people out there doing great work. I'm not the only person that does this.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, greatest reaction. I don't know. I feel like I've had it benefit me more than not, because I'm usually in circles where that plays to my advantage. Like I obviously had to dress it down when I was working in corporate. I didn't have as many tattoos when I was working at Apple, but I was way bigger than I am now when I was working at Apple. So like I had to dress it down a bit. Yeah. Which is nice, because like it's no different than working with a pro. It's, you got to play the room, right? You got to play the man. So, if the man is, B Marshall's 6'4", 250. Yeah. And I literally remember being on the Stairmaster one time. I rented like a car that he had. So we finished a session one day, and there was this guy sitting there with like a Jordan polo on and just waiting for Brandon. Brandon was like, yo, you want to come out and check this car out? I was like, okay. I was like, what the fuck is going on? And this guy like walks out with us, and he was Michael Jordan's fleet manager. Okay. So he has like 80 something cars, and he had just bought the new Koenigsegg, one of 4 in the world. So he wanted to get rid of one of his cars. So the car he was getting rid of was a Mercedes AMG GTS.
No big deal.
No big deal. Is that good? So I was flying back from Dallas, and I had like a week in Tampa, and I was on Turo looking to rent a car, and they had a Mercedes AMG GTS Edition 1. I was like, fuck it. Yeah. So I rented it, and I like pulled up to the gym in it the next day. And like, mind you, Stefan Diggs, I think, has a Ferrari 488. A couple guys had the Bentley Bentayga. There's AMGs, there's name it. Like it's just HOA parking lot is literally a hashtag you can search on, and it's just all the crazy cars that these guys own. The B walks out and thinks it's like someone's car who's a player, but it's mine. He just loses his mind. He's like, oh, he's a bit too tall for it. But yeah, like he told me a week later, is like, hey, like one of the only reasons, because he doesn't understand. He doesn't have to. He was a pro football player. He doesn't need to understand the ins and outs of the 5-syllable words. What he understood was like, I wear off-white, and he said this, like, you wear off-white shoes, Stone Island sweatpants, you drive the cars I like, and you're big. So that was really why you're here.
You fit in.
Yeah, and it's like, well, cool. Go where you fit in. That's great. But yeah, there's been times like when I was working like at Apple where, I'd try and cover as many tattoos as I can. I would wear like big clothes. I'd wear my glasses. I have my hair cut different, and I wear loafers rather than J's. But you're still just playing the man, right? Like some rooms I have to be really small. Some rooms, even at Apple, like when probably shouldn't name names, but like when the president of the company or the CEO of the company walks in, it's like you need to have a certain demeanor. When the wife of the treasurer walks in, you have to have a certain demeanor, or at least I think you do. And it's nothing outside of the purview of my personality, but it's just different edges, right? Like if you need me to be big, I'll be big. You need me to be small, I'll be small. Yeah, it makes you more comfortable. I don't care. It's nothing to me.
Yeah, you got to just play your cards right. I'm always interested to hear what your kind of biggest inspiration, people who inspired you. Mind Pump Media team, Justin, Sal, and Adam, and like they kind of inspired this, continuing on educating that next generation of athletes. For me personally, I like featuring high performance athletes, NFL, NBA, NHL, but I also like showcasing strength and conditioning, because we shouldn't necessarily be training like pro athletes, because a 15-year-old needs something different than B Marshall. Right. We wrap up every episode of the Athletes Podcast by asking kind of the biggest piece of advice. I know we already kind of touched on that one. You didn't really love it, but maybe anything else that we haven't touched on this episode that you would say is super important, integral information for a young athlete to know, understand, maybe develop over the next couple of years. And then they'll be able to refer to this podcast and be like, hey, Jordan
Yeah,
Shallow
who's the
said
guy?
this.
Who's the go? I think it's a lot on the personal development side.
Okay.
And the leagues are getting better at this just because they're having to deal with the backlash of, oh man, we're taking these, these student athletes out of college and giving them millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Like the NFL has just recently in the last couple of years changed their pay structure
Yeah.
to stretch over like 32 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. It's like, oh no, like now you only get paid $45,000 a week. Like that's fucking insane. I think personal development's it, because that'll be what finds you further than anything else. So whatever that looks like for you, I think is probably, and that's like, this is an old man answer and might not be what like a kid is looking for, and they will probably not take. I guarantee you, if there's a kid out there who is a good athlete and listens to this, they won't take that advice, and that might actually make them the athlete they need to be. But in 10 years, they'll find this whenever they're ready and be like, oh yeah, that guy was kind of onto something. So I think that's it. And you see athletes in different levels of personal development. Like, you'll have kids going into a combine that are professional athletes already, right? Whether they make it to the league or not. And you have kids who are going to the league. You're like, this kid's going to run half the city up his nose. And it's just like, I think that piece is hard, because you cannot imagine what it's like when the jersey goes on and the paychecks start coming in and everyone's coming out of the woodwork and and that's the advice I give to all the guys that I work with. It's like, hey, like, I'm here, like, I work on behalf of this company. Like, I don't have, like, you don't pay me, right? But I'm going to give you some advice as far as like when people approach you, because LeBron gets paid 1.2 million for his team a year or whatever, like his physio and his nutritionist and all of that, his massage therapist. It's like, you're a target now.
Yeah.
Like, everyone knows how much money you make.
Trying to extort you.
Yeah. So like, I always tell people, like, look, if you need a vet, like if someone's like, hey, so-and-so wants to like work with me and here's the cost, like you tell me and I'll be able to be like yes or no. And I don't have a vested interest in it. Like, and that's what I tell them. Like, look, man, I got my own business. I got my own company. Like, this is just something I kind of do, not for fun. Like it's what if I could in a perfect world only do that. But it's like, I'm not trying to, I don't make a buck off you. Like, big fan of these kids on the whole. But that's something like, personal development would be big. Get the right people around you. And then if you have the skills, that'll be, honestly, the people and the personal development side. I see that trip up more people than the actual skills.
I love it. And then I think that's why you're having so much success with Pre-Script, everything that you're doing there. It's legit. It's awesome. I really appreciate your time.
Hey, man. Thanks for coming to do this here.
And your studio, dude. This is the easiest podcast we had to do.
Really? Oh, sick. Fucking right. Wicked. Awesome, man.
I appreciate it. Where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, so the podcast is RX'd RADIO on Spotify, YouTube, iTunes. My personal Instagram is @the_muscle_doc. DOC, and then Pre-Script is www.pre-script.com.
Fitting to have the muscle doc on the Athletes podcast. Thanks again for coming on, Jordan. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 126 of the Athletes Podcast. We're doing things a little bit differently. As you can see, your producer is the one giving the outro this time. Thought we'd mix it up a little bit from having Dave do it. Big shout out goes to Jordan Shallow. He let Dave come and record the podcast in their studio at the gym. I wasn't able to make it for the podcast live, but I did get to listen to it. I'm sure you all loved it as much as I did. Jordan Shallow, such a powerful speaker. He has so much insightful knowledge. I just loved every second of it. If you all enjoyed this podcast, whether you were listening to it, whether you were watching it on YouTube, please, it's huge for us if you liked it, you commented on it, subscribed to it, shared it to anyone that is interested in our content. Again, this is episode 126 of the Athletes Podcast. Thank you so much for listening to it, and we'll see you guys next time.